Hi guys, welcome to Expert Living with KB. I am KB, and on this channel I share my experience as a South African living in the north of Sweden. So if you're planning on moving up here or it's just interesting for you, stick around, click on the subscribe button because you might be in for a treat. So I've been gone for a while, but I'm back now and I am committed to bringing you all the information that is going to make your move to the north of Sweden that much smoother. So we'll be tackling a number of topics and I'll have like a series of each. And on this particular one, we're going to be looking at practical life in Sweden. But on this specific video, we're going to be looking at how to rent an apartment in Sweden and most specifically in the north of Sweden. So when I first moved to Sweden, I was really struggling with finding an apartment. The system here can be a bit complicated and I was going through YouTube hoping to find information, but I wasn't really lucky. So I'm hoping that this video is going to help you who are trying to find rental apartments in Sweden. This video, we're going to look at the rental process, so understanding how the rental market works in Sweden. We're going to look at associated costs and budgeting that you might have to do, and I will share my tips of how I was able to secure an apartment in the north of Sweden before even moving here. So if this sounds good, stick around and let's get into it. So I've prepared a couple of notes, so I'm going to keep looking at my phone. So first we'll look at the different types of rental apartments that you can find. The first one is first-hand contract, or in Swedish, första hand contracts. So these are first-hand contracts and these are a bit difficult to come by. You will have to stand in line in a queuing system, and this is also something that is important to know, and we'll talk a little bit about this further into the video. So the second type is a second-hand contract, so andra hand contract. So this is more a subletting kind of contract. And then the third one is more renting somebody's room, so in a buende, so you rent somebody's room and you live with them in their house. So those are the three types that you can find. So many apartments are controlled by the queuing system, in Swedish bostadskö. And of course, in smaller cities like Luleå, that is in the north of Sweden, it is not as competitive in bigger cities like Stockholm, but it's still important that you become part of the queue as soon as possible because it's still, of course, slightly competitive. There's also an option of getting private rental, which is a little difficult to come by, but if you network and you kind of ask the right people, then you might be able to get one. I was personally able to get a private rental and I didn't need to queue in the system. And if you're interested as to how exactly I was able to network and find an apartment before even coming to Sweden, wait until the end of the video and I will share that with you. And now we're going to look at the step-by-step guide to actually renting an apartment. So the first one is to join a queue system. Different municipalities have different websites where you can sign up, and the longer you stay signed up, for every day that you're signed up, you collect 1 point. And so the longer you stay in the queue, the better chances that you have to actually qualify for an apartment. The different municipal sites or housing agencies, as I call them, are, for instance, in Luleå, we have Luleå, we also have Rixham, you have K2A as well. That is a private company as far as I know. So I'll put a few of them up here on the screen so that you know exactly what you're looking for. So for the second type of rental apartment, which is the second-hand apartment, you can also sign up by looking at different websites. We have websites like Bostadsdirekt or Blocket or even Facebook Marketplace. But with these kind of rental agreements, you have to be very careful and make sure that it is in fact a legitimate advertisement. So if I would try and avoid these if I haven't actually come to Sweden yet. But of course, these are more easier to come by as opposed to the first-hand contract. So I would just say, just be careful and do your homework and make sure that it is in fact a legitimate advertisement. Next step would then, once you've decided if you're going to go for a first-hand contract or a second-hand contract, but as I would advise, even if you have opted to go for a second-hand contract because it might be easier to come by, I would still advise that you're still signed up with the different municipal housing agencies in order for you to start collecting points. In order to get an apartment, you would then have to apply for one. Once you have started collecting points, you go onto the different housing agency websites and you look for something that is to your requirements and it is suitable to you, and then you will then put in what we call interest. So you sign up your interest to that specific apartment, and if you qualify for it or if you have enough points for it, then they will contact you and ask you if you would be willing to take on the contract. So to apply for a contract, in most cases, you would need what we call a social security number, but you can also use a coordination number. You will get one of these once you have applied for your residence permit before you even come to Sweden. And something that I also forgot to mention is that in order for you to sign up on these housing agency queues, you actually have to have either a social security number or a coordination number. So as soon as you get your coordination number, go ahead and sign up on the agencies before even coming to Sweden. So that's exactly what I did. As soon as I was able to get my coordination number, I signed up, and that still wasn't enough by the time I was looking for an apartment. So it's important that you really get started with that as soon as possible. Another requirement is that some landlords might want a Swedish reference. So actually getting a second-hand contract when you first arrive and then perhaps putting that as your reference once you get a first-hand contract might also be one way to go about it. I have not really done that, but I assume that it's something that's possible. So now you need to understand your lease agreement. And in most cases, you might have to put down a deposit. I have not personally put down a deposit in any of the apartments that I have come across, but in some instances, it might be required. So this, you're looking at 1 to 3 months rent. And also just be aware that in certain rental agreements, certain utility costs are not included. For instance, warm water and electricity might not be included in your rental agreement. Perhaps it only includes heating. But so just read the fine print and know what additional costs you might be faced with once you settle for that specific rental apartment. And once you've now gotten your rental apartment and it is time to move in, you will receive a checklist where you will then check or write down any faults in the house that you might find when moving in, to ensure that when you do move out, they do not charge you or penalize you for these damages. And then it is important then that once you have received your rental agreement and you've moved into your apartment, to go and register your new address. I did it at the local Skatteverket. So it's like the tax agency, the local tax agency. I'm not really sure if this is where you do it all around Sweden, but this is where I did it when I first moved into my apartment. And now going into costing and budgeting. How much are you going to need and things to factor in? So the rental prices in the north of Sweden for a 1-bedroom apartment, they range between 6,000 SEK and 10,000 SEK. Of course, in bigger cities like Stockholm, you might be looking at anything between 10 and 18,000 SEK a month. So you can make the conversions based on which country you're coming from. As I've mentioned, there might be additional costs like electricity, internet, hot water. So these are some factors to take into consideration. There's also housing insurance. In Sweden, everyone who's renting an apartment is required by law to have home insurance. And of course, the price depends on which insurance company you go for and how big your apartment is, and of course, what you would like the insurance to cover. Just a few tips. If you are moving here and you want to save a little bit of money, perhaps a shared apartment would be a good idea, but definitely make sure that you check if it is legitimate, and never pay rent before you actually sign your rental contract. They will never, under any circumstance, make you pay for an apartment if you haven't signed a contract. So just be aware of that. Also, be prepared for background checks. So the landlords might look at your finances. They might want you to provide proof that you have an income, and of course might also require that you have some kind of a Swedish reference to vouch for you. Use your network. And the most important one, which I used to get a rental apartment in the north of Sweden, was to network. So one might ask, how exactly am I supposed to network if I've never been to this place? I do not know anybody. So what I did, as soon as I got my employment contract from my employer, I went on LinkedIn and searched for any employees, PhD students, because that was the position that I was going to take up at the university. So I looked at international PhD students and I connected with them and told them that I am moving to the north of Sweden and I'm looking for accommodation, and that they should please recommend anything that they knew. But I also went on to social media. Yeah, I went on Instagram, and I also looked for people who were living in the north of Sweden, and I asked them questions. And of course, someone always responds, and lucky enough, I received a response from one of the postdoctoral students that was already living here, and they were actually living in a private apartment, and that private company didn't require that you have accumulated any amount of points. And so it was on a first come, first serve basis, and there was a couple of rooms available, and I was lucky enough to secure that apartment before I even came to Sweden. So don't be afraid to slip into someone's DM. Don't be afraid to connect and ask people on LinkedIn. Networking will get you very far if you're moving to a place that you've never been before. Just to wrap up this video, we looked at what the Swedish rental market is like. We looked at some costs associated. We also then looked at some tips and tricks that you can use to make your rental seeking experience more bearable. So if this video was helpful, please like the video, comment, and let me know if you're already in Sweden. Let me know what other tips and tricks that you use that I might not have spoken about. And if you're planning your move, let me know what you're looking forward to, and be sure to ask any questions relating to this. And if you want more information about moving to the north of Sweden, do comment that below, and I'll be sure to answer to the best of my ability. So the next video is going to be looking at how to buy a car in the north of Sweden, because I'm sure a lot of people always ask, should I buy a car? Do I need a car? How is the transportation system up there? And we're going to talk about all of that in the next video. So if this sounds interesting to you, don't forget to subscribe and switch on the bell so that you know when the next video is up. I hope that this was fun to you and it was educational and you actually got something from it. So yes, thank you for watching. See you on the next one.